Right, and I do believe that we are now live, and Laura. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me and my special guest today, Anne-Laure Le Cunff. And I probably ruined your surname there, and you put me straight, Anne, I'm sure. But Anne-Laure is a very interesting person. I came across her on YouTube and just sort of fell in love with the videos. And I sort of took it from there. And then you know how cheeky I am, guys. I just said, is Anne-Laure on LinkedIn? Yes, she is. Well, let me see if she'll talk to me. Yes, she will. So here I am, guys. And I hope that you'll drop some comments just to make sure that we are live and you can hear us. And that will be good feedback for us too. But Anne-Laure has come from working at Google, fair enough. And she's created her own sphere called Ness Labs. And she'll tell us more about that. But like I said, having this YouTube following of 8,000 followers, but then an email list of 80,000 followers, how can you not be impressed by that? So covering practical neuroscience and also entrepreneurship, and especially focusing on education. There's a love for technology, Anne-Laure, I can see that. And you enjoy talking about neuroscience, productivity, mental wellness. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I know they're very, very complex topics. So I do love it when I come across someone who can explain it to us in a way that makes sense. And especially as business owners, we do need to understand what's going on up here too. So we'll cut through some of the gobbledygook as well. And Anne-Laure is also a prolific writer and an international speaker. Just came back from somewhere last week. Might hear a little bit more about that. But if you want to be happier mentally and you want to be working smarter, and you want to do that without sacrificing your health and also your mental wealth and strength, then this is the place for you to be, because we want to make sure that we're using what's up here to have a good life, but the head and the body go together. So there's a whole holistic thing that's going on here. We're focusing on the mind today, and I'm sure we'll fall into other areas. But Anne-Laure, welcome to today's show. Great to see you. And Conchita saying, thankful Thursday to everyone. Thank you, Conchita. Very good to see you too. But coming from Google, now that's not the sum total of your life, I know, Anne-Laure, and you can take me through some of it. But if you can bring me up to date and tell me more about Google at the end of that, that would be great. Thank you.
First, thanks so much for having me. It's my first LinkedIn Live, so this is exciting. My time at Google, it was very exciting. I absolutely loved my time there. I worked first in London and then in San Francisco. And in my last job, I was working on digital health products. So things like Google Fit, which is the equivalent of Apple Health, but for Google. Also Android Wear at the time, it was called the equivalent of the Apple Watch. And I was doing a lot of work with partners in the health and wellness space and trying to basically encourage people to move more, to eat better, to be more conscious of their health, and support them through this journey with technology. So that was my last job at Google, and I had a fantastic time there, even though it was a high pressure job, but I learned so much. And I think it was a great place to start my career.
It sure was. And all this wearables, I mean, it's become more popular since, of course. I'm one of these older folks and I don't have any of these watches to measure my heart rate and anything else that's going on. But I know that everyone's into self-monitoring, and the whole point is to get good feedback so that you can do better. So that must have been a really exciting project to work on. But beyond that, Anne-Laure, you did love your job, but it also created a health problem for you, which shocked me. I was a bit surprised. Now, we talk about burnout and we think it's something that only happens when you're in a bad space and you're doing things wrong and etc. and you hate your job. But that really was not the case for you, was it?
Not at all. As I mentioned, I love my job. I love my colleagues. And actually, what was interesting is that I think that was a big leading cause of why I ended up burning out, because I was so excited about what I was doing. I was so scared of disappointing people there that I would say yes to absolutely everything. I was the yes girl on my team. You could just come to me and say, hey, do you mind working a little bit later tonight to help me with this? Or we have this little product launch happening in a month and we need extra help. Would you like to get involved? I was like, yes, absolutely. I will do it. I will do my best also to do a good job. So not only just say yes to a project, but then try to execute on it. And it got pretty bad as, we only have 24 hours in a day. We need to sleep and eat. And so I started basically sleeping less in order to be able to do all of the things that I had committed to do. And I remember once I was on a work trip in San Francisco while I was still based in London. And I ended up crying on a call with a colleague.
So you burst into tears.
I just burst into tears. And I'm someone who, in general, feels like I'm pretty, kind of in tune with my emotions and I can feel things coming before it gets to that point. But that time, absolutely not. I got a tiny bit of what was really just constructive feedback. And I started crying. And I did tell my colleague afterwards. So once we became a little bit closer and got to each other, but at the time I pretended that my internet connection was so bad that I had to log off just so they wouldn't see me crying on the call. And this is when I started wondering what's wrong with me, because that was my instinctive reaction. What's wrong with me? And I started looking up information around those kind of very strong emotional reactions that you can have at work. And I found a lot of information around burnout. But all of the information I found assumed that you had a terrible boss, a micromanaging type of, manager working with you, or that you hated your work, or that someone was doing this to you. And in my case, I loved my job and I was doing it to myself. There were no resources for people who were ambitious, who actually wanted to do all of these things, and who struggled because of that to manage their mental health at work.
And this would be, just realised, that my microphone is not quite in the position that it should be on my desk. I hope everyone's been able to hear me. Let me make sure I get that right. Oh, they normally pull me up. They're quite good at pulling me up on these things. But yeah, let me make sure I got that right. In between me. Right. So hopefully we'll get some decent sound out of me. I apologize to everyone if you haven't heard me clearly. You said great conversation, some of you. So you've been able to hear Anne-Laure quite clearly, apart from me. I'm back on stream, guys. It takes me a while for my brain to click and then boom, I'm off. So Anne-Laure, this slide into burnout happens. It can happen. It's happened to me more recently and I wasn't completely aware of it. But you're quite right. This thing about, and Adrian saying, great, can hear us both fine. Thank you, Adrian. Cheers. I have people around me that love me, and Laura, it's good. So yeah, slide into burnout for you. And yes, having a job that you don't like and you're going in and you hate every minute of the day and yeah, being micromanaged, etc. This is the kind of association. You're doing something that you don't like. So when you said doing something that you like, a job that you like, a career that you like, it just kind of blows my mind. So this ended up being a catalyst for you doing something completely new. So if you can say what happened, I mean, I hear the symptoms, actually, the bursting into tears, being, I suppose, emotionally fragile, not realizing just how close to the edge you might be. I call it close to the edge of something, but close to the edge of breaking down can get to that point too. But that might have been a very big wake-up call for you, just like, why am I feeling so emotional, so tearful? This doesn't make sense. So how did you make sense of it, apart from you looked at a little bit of ideas around what burnout is? Because your symptoms weren't really totally matching, were they?
Yeah, so I wish I had this, very simple story where I just realized what it was and then fixed it and then went on helping other people with this. But it was a bit of a more meandering journey. In terms of addressing the problem when it happened, I was, again, very fortunate that I had an amazing manager. So I was in the position where I could talk to her and we took some things off my plate and we put some like new principles in place in the team in order for this to not happen again, not only to me, but to other people. So, for example, something very simple, but my manager stopped emailing us in the evening. So, because she had kids, she had to work quite late sometimes, go back home, pick up the kids, bath, dinner, all of that. And once they were in bed, she would work. We were lucky that around the same time the scheduling feature came out with email, and so she would work in the evening, but we would only start get her emails in the morning. It's a small thing, but the reality is that if you send an email, even if you tell people on your team, oh, don't worry about it now, you can read it later, you can work on it later, you're still going to add to their cognitive load because they are going to open it, they are going to read it. And even if they're only going to start proactively working on it the day after, they're going to go to bed thinking about that question you asked or that problem that you highlighted, right? So this is just a small example, but we put into place a lot of different changes that would help support the mental health of everyone on the team and that would allow us to work our best without overworking ourselves, basically. So I felt a lot better after this, but it was not the only time in my career I experienced burnout. It was only the first time. When I left Google, I worked on a couple of startups, experienced burnout again. And again, all of the resources out there were for people who hated their jobs. And in that case, I was building my own startup. I I had designed my job. I didn't even have a manager anymore. So nobody to blame for this. And when my startup failed, I was completely lost. I didn't really know what I wanted to do next. So I went back to the drawing board and I asked myself, what is something I've always been interested in that I would love learning about, even if money or status or any of that was out of the equation? And for me, it was the brain, how the brain works, why we think the way we think, why we feel the way we feel, why we experience the world in the way we experience the world. So I decided to go back to school to study neuroscience. And in that process, I learned a lot more about how our mind works, including why we burn out. And I decided to start writing about this publicly. I started this, at the time, little newsletter where every week I would take something I studied in school and try to translate it into practical strategies that people would be able to use and apply at work to take better care of their mental health and be more creative, more productive, and just in general live a more fulfilling life. The resource that I had hoped existed when I went through those challenges myself. That was the birth of Ness Labs.
And you know what, Anne-Laure, that is the place of a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners. We're kind of, we solved a problem for ourselves, and then we want to provide the same kind of solution for other people. Now, wait, a couple of sentences back, you mentioned the word cognitive load. So I promised myself, Anne-Laure, that I wouldn't have any gobbledygook on here. Not that that was gobbledygook, but there might be people watching us thinking, what did she just say? So cognitive load, yes. Could you break that down for me a little bit more, Anne?
Yeah, so cognitive has to do with your mental processes in your brain, and load is the weight of something. So if you take those two things together, really, cognitive load is just the weight or the pressure that you're putting on your own mind or on somebody else's mind. And that can take different forms. It's something that a lot of web designers think about a lot, how to design a web page or any kind of design in a way that doesn't create too much cognitive load for the user so they're not overwhelmed. It's also something that's discussed a lot in education. How can a teacher deliver information to their students with the right load? So you want enough load that the students feel challenged enough that they're going to stay engaged and focus on the content, but you don't want the load to be too much that you're creating anxiety and students disengage. So that's what cognitive load is. It's used in lots of different parts of research. Even people who design the dashboards in cars, thinking about how much is going on there. Because if you have too much cognitive load of people being like, where do I press this? But what is this, etc., you can have people being distracted from what is really important, which is looking at the road. So that's what cognitive load is. And that's why I mentioned it in the context of work, where sometimes we do things where we're just like mentioning something in passing or sending a quick email to a colleague, and we don't realize that we're adding to their cognitive load.
And it's the pressure, the build-up of pressure that that's creating, and I mean, I think most human beings are pretty responsible. And when I came out of way back, came out with a degree, and I was studying and finished studying, got into a job. I just wanted to be the best, and I just wanted to do my best. And I get the wanting to say yes to everything and do it to the best of your ability. And it feels like a good idea at the time, working late, getting up early, neglecting the odd meal, sleep going a little bit out of kilter, and you think that's fine. It's going to be fine. I'm young. I was 20 something. Why should I have any problems? But, you know, neuroscience is the study of what's going on in the brain, and it's that the neurochemicals that are happening that are released when we're doing positive things, but also when things go wrong. And you came back round to deciding that, okay, I've been burnt out a couple of times now, jobs where I've worked for other people. I've actually worked for myself, as you said, your own startup. You're thinking, what is the problem? Because burnout is a huge word that everyone's sort of like talking about now. The thing is that you need to have enough stress to be excited and interested in something, but not too much that it shuts you down. So I think if I'd had my time again, perhaps I would have gone into neuroscience and studied it a bit more myself, Anne-Laure. So this is where you've gone. And I don't know what else you've sort of found on your journey, because I don't know, is it a 3-year PhD or is it 2 years? I've forgotten how long it takes now to do a PhD.
I have 1 year left. So I did 2 years for my master's, which I did part time. And I am in the third year of my PhD now. So 5 years in total to finish. And yeah, finish the entire doctoral journey to obtaining a PhD from scratch. I had never formally studied anything around neuroscience before.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So you did the master's and then now you're doing the PhD.
Yes. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I'm sure there are entrepreneurs and business owners out there thinking, yeah, I would love to go back and just spend my time learning something new. Would it be something that you would encourage them to do? I mean, if they have a passion for something, and because this whole thing about, unfortunately, growing up is that we've got responsibilities, and it could be family, it could be just, put a roof over your head, your mortgage. Responsibilities are there, and it makes it very difficult for us to, dare I say the word, pivot, and or turn around and redo our lives again. So you've almost had an opportunity to redo things.
I always tell people to be very careful when they hear advice saying, just quit your job and go and follow your dream. That's completely irresponsible to do this. Um, I think, fortunately, nowadays, there are so many options for people to explore different potential areas of interest that they have without quitting their current job straight away. So you have a lot of part-time study programs. You have a lot of online programs as well, depending on what you want to study. A lot of things you really don't need to be on campus to be able to do. Even myself, for my PhD in neuroscience, I'm only on campus 2 days a week to work in the lab, and the rest of the time, which is something that was not possible to do pre-pandemic, but now things are more flexible. Anytime I'm working on writing research papers or, filling grants or those kind of things where I only really need my computer, I'm not coming on campus for this. So things have changed in a way where you can design your studies around your current job, around your current responsibilities, even if you have a family. It's the same for the master's that I did. Normally it takes 1 year, but I was working at the time, consulting, freelancing, and doing all of the things I needed to do to be able to pay my rent. So I did it part-time, so I could still do that on the side. So I would say, first, financially speaking, it makes more sense to take it slowly and to keep any sort of like stable income that you have, but also
Lost.
from
Just a
creativity.
slight drop out there, and so I hope that everyone was
Can you
okay.
end?
So Anne-Laure, you were just talking about, how people can join these two things together. That's where we got. We just lost that last couple of seconds. So you'd love to
Yeah.
recall that and repeat that. Be lovely.
No, that's fine. I was saying that from a purely practical standpoint, when you think about, your financial responsibilities, etc., it makes sense to do that. But also, it makes sense from an explorative curiosity side of things, because you don't know what you don't know, and you're not going to be able to know for sure if something is worth pursuing full time if you haven't had an opportunity to dip your toes a little bit in it. So if you were to think of this as a long-term journey, which it is, again, took me 5 years to pivot. So it's something that you can take your time to do. I would probably start with some online courses that where you can just explore the online courses that you can complete in like maybe a month or 2 months or something like this. And then after that, if you love it, maybe start looking at more formal degrees. And then when you're at university, there are lots of opportunities to talk with other people about career opportunities, what kind of jobs you can do. Maybe you can start with a little bit of consulting and freelancing on the side before you seek a new full-time job. So there's lots of ways to do things that are incremental, still fun and exciting, but safer.
Sounds good. And I wanted to just help you to, I know we talked about this beforehand, but just to encourage people to not think that whatever job you start off doing, you have to stick it out to the end. There are ways of turning your life around. And we talk a lot about limiting beliefs, and, there's lots of ideas that you're quite right. The stories that we see out there about other entrepreneurs, we only see the positive side, we never see the downside. And this is a place for us to be really honest that being in business is great, but also it can be difficult. And burnout can be a consequence of overworking, even when you love what you do. So I think we've kind of brought that out there. So going now you're doing your PhD. What useful, if I said, give me, I don't know, perhaps 3 useful tips that might encourage a business owner to look after their mental and their emotional health, which is all part of this emotional intelligence journey as well. Are there any things that come to mind? I know you had your own personal experience, but things that you've discovered which I may not know.
To me, I think the most helpful mindset shift that I had is that I used to try and manage my time as much as possible. So I was always trying to be as efficient as possible with my time, to use as much of my time as possible, which again leads to things like skipping lunch or not sleeping enough, etc. Whereas now that I understand better how we work and how we can truly maximize our creativity and our productivity, I focus on my energy and my attention as well. So time is still, it exists. Like, we're not going to just ignore that we have our time, but we also have energy and attention. And these, in a way, are a lot more important to manage in a sustainable way if you want to do your best work. So for your energy, for example, being aware of how you feel throughout the day is incredibly important. So you can optimize your approach to work, your schedule, the way you approach your tasks. There's obviously, by now everyone is familiar with your circadian rhythms. Like, so some people work better in the morning, some people work better in the evening. There's that for sure, but that's a very macro level. At the micro level, also, it's super interesting to start noticing what are activities, experiences, conversations that give you energy, and what are the ones that drain your energy. And then, next step, asking yourself, how can I have more of the ones that give me energy and less of the ones that drain my energy? So, personally, I do this with journaling, but any kind of practice that helps you be more mindful of how you experience your different levels of energy throughout the day can be helpful. There's an entrepreneur called Sahil Bloom. What he does is super simple. If you don't like writing like me, is that he color codes his calendar: red, yellow, and green. And so at the end of the day, he just go through his calendar. Anything that gave him an energy, a good meeting where he felt really inspired and creative afterwards, that goes green. Yellow for the ones where it's like a bit meh, but it's fine. And if there are conversations or projects he worked on where he felt like his energy stores were completely depleted, that's red. And what he wants is that at the end of the week, when he does his weekly review, he wants has as little red as possible. There's always going to be a little bit of red. You have to be realistic. Not everything is giving you energy, but as little red as possible. So that's how you can manage your energy, for example.
That's an interesting concept as well, Anne-Laure, because I talk to people about managing your energy, and I suppose you've defined the fact that, well, at least brought to the front, that it's important to do that. We don't Energy is something that we don't worry about until we don't have any. It's a bit like keep thinking when you're young and you sort of run up the stairs 2 at a time. You get to sort of my age and you only do it 1 at a time. You think, ooh, sure, there was a time when I used to just think it was so easy, 2 at a time. That's to do with energy. So energy management is something you don't think about until you don't have it. But this whole thing about managing it throughout the day and working out what people do call our energy vampires, perhaps, or time vampires, working out the people that you can avoid. Sometimes it's difficult to avoid people, but if you're beginning to be mindful, and I love that word mindful, and more self-aware, when you're around people that either feed you. You can actually, for me personally, I can feel myself expanding and I feel like, fireworks going off inside of me. And people that are taking something away from me, there's some kind of sense of shrinking, a sense of it somehow just doesn't feel very good. So it's interesting about how we know when we're not getting energy or giving energy, but it's a strange concept. And then even the idea about just imagining that you only have, 20 units of energy per day. So you might spend it quite carefully. You be very careful where you spend it. But this red, sort of the traffic light things, red, amber, green, a great idea. Fabulous idea. I've not come across that before. And if you could just remind me of that guy's name, because I might have to jot it down because someone's bound to ask me afterwards. I know that.
Yes.
What was his name again?
Sahil Bloom, Sahil. That's his first name, and last name is Bloom, Bloom.
Great, lovely. Lovely, Sahil Bloom. So yes, the concept of looking at energy and how you can manage that. And then you mentioned productivity. So human beings, you're right about this time thing. We all rush around, including me. I keep slapping myself and saying, stop saying it, Joy. Oh, I haven't got enough time, or I'm too busy, or I'm too whatever. That's not the problem. I've been told quite a few times, and I think you're saying it to me as well. Joy, it's your energy and your productivity. So we've looked a little bit at the energy side of what I might be doing right or wrong. And is it just to do with surroundings, people, or tasks? Because energy is something, you're right, someone can inject the energy back into the system or it can be drained from the system. Is it tasks, people, places?
For the last one, it's attention, basically. And so it's what you choose to pay attention to. And that has to do with your tasks, the tasks that you work on, but also the information and the content that you consume. So if you are going to consume a lot of it's a little bit like your diet, right? Like if it's an information diet, a lot of junk food, junk information, you're going to fill your mind with that low quality data, and this is not going to help you be more productive and more creative. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you're a bit more intentional with the content that you consume, this is going to feed your creativity, and this is in turn going to help you be more productive. So the attention aspect is really about being intentional about where you direct your focus throughout the day, which tasks, what are your priorities, and so what is coming into your kind of like arena of awareness, what are you letting in basically. Um, and it's something that we very rarely do with intention. We
It's a
just,
bit sad.
yes, it's, but because it is, again, going back to energy, it does require a little bit more energy to be able to do this. If you were intentional every single second of the day about where to you focus your attention, I don't think that would be possible, but you'd be really tired at the end of the day, I think. So again, you have to be a bit strategic here. And if you combine the idea of managing your energy, and in those moments where your energy levels are at the highest, deciding to focus your attention on things that you think are very meaningful, are going to really move the needle when it comes to your tasks and your projects, then you can actually work only just a few hours during the day and get a lot of the stuff that you want to get done. That's important. And actually, it's interesting because there's a study showing that we roughly have around 4 hours of deep creative work in us every day.
Per day.
Yeah, per day. What they did is that they looked at researchers and at their productivity, looking at their research output and the number of hours that they were working a day, and the best was in between up to 4 hours, and then it started declining. So again, combining energy and attention and saying it's roughly 4 hours, but you'd have to figure out the number of hours that it is for you. It's 4 hours on average for
Somewhere
that
in your
study.
day.
Exactly. But everyone is different. So you could be in different places on that spectrum. But let's say you have 4 hours, just for the sake of explaining this. You can figure out, when are your 4 hours? Are they in the morning? Are they in the evening? Or are they, because that's the case for some people, like where they start the day, they have those 2 hours and then no energy left. And then maybe sometimes like around 2 p.m., they're back online and they can do that. So just figuring that for yourself. Again, having some sort of practice that makes you more aware of this, journaling, the color coding in your calendar, like just trying to figure out that. And then based on that, you can allocate your attention. So say, okay, I'm going to start with my most strategic tasks in the morning when I have those high levels of energy. So anything that requires me to really think creatively, to connect the dots together, to maybe have, difficult conversations with people where we need to find solutions together, we're not aligned yet, etc. I do that in the morning. And then in the afternoon, you can do all of your admin tasks, like little things that people have asked you to fill. Maybe like there are some like forms, there's a presentation that you've been working on, it's mostly done, you just need to finish the design to make the sites pretty, etc. That kind of stuff that has a low cognitive load, to come back to what we were talking about earlier.
Good word.
And yeah, and that doesn't require a lot of energy. And in this way, you're really maximizing the way you're using your day, but without trying to cram every minute of it with work.
Yes, yes. And we're talking to, entrepreneurs and business owners who, within reason, can manage their day. It might be a little bit more difficult if you're working for someone and your actual agenda is dictated by somebody else. But trying to manage your day, if you can, working out when you have the energy and doing the more difficult tasks during that space. I mean, I'm not a morning person, but come sort of 10:30ish, I know my energy does kind of pick up. And if I'm being really intentional, as you said, paying attention to what I'm doing, to where my attention is going and the energy is there, I think I get more done in that space of the next hour and a half than I do in the whole day, where I do then say, oh, I'm just pottering around doing things. But the best work has already been done. I know that. And I get a bit of a second wind, as I call it, late afternoon, if I'm lucky. And then if I stay up longer than I should do, you mentioned long hours and late hours, about 11 o'clock at night sometimes, I can have another like rush of energy, which is really weird, for 2 hours. So but it's not sensible to work like that, Anne-Laure. Having an energy spurt at 11 o'clock at night might sound fabulous. I may feel that it's a good idea, but it's not from a health perspective. And we were talking about, just this slow decline into ill health.
So I was just going to say that It doesn't necessarily have to be bad. The reason why it's bad is because we follow schedules where usually you have to be up in the morning and be somewhere. That's the only reason why it's bad, because you don't sleep enough. But I know people, and actually, like, there is also research showing this. Like, if if you were to go to bed at 1 a.m., but then you can sleep the entire 7 hours that you need to sleep, or 8 hours, then you would be completely fine. It's just that you have a different circadian rhythm. But our entire society is designed for morning larks, not for night owls. So because of that, people who have those, like, sparks of energy very late in the evening are at a disadvantage compared to people who enjoy working more in the morning. So I just wanted to complete what you were saying, in the sense that yes, it is not good for your health in our society, but not intrinsically.
And I'm glad you pointed that out because, for me, I keep thinking, well, why have I got this energy late at night? That's like just so unfair. I could have done with that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I was a bit sleepy. So it didn't quite work that way. But because society is dictating again how things are meant to be, we're all meant to be in work at 9 o'clock. We're supposedly meant to leave at 5, but obviously people don't. Um, yeah, everything's been put into neat little boxes, but that's not the way the body works. So it's actually okay to get that last spurt of energy, because if I had my own rhythm, I would then wake up later and start again. I got a feeling though, Anne-Laure, that my day might start shifting if I do that. There's something strange that's going to happen. I was going to fall off the edge of this screen, really. But I don't know whether I would, because I tend to like balance it out. But anyway, enough about me. This is all about you, Anne-Laure. And getting back to the whole focus of neuroscience, as a word, it's probably an unusual word, Anne-Laure. Did you kind of first have to get a definition of what it is, and then, because doing the PhD is like, starting something from fresh and learning everything about it, and you're so curious and excited, and you need the definitions to know what you're supposed to be pursuing. So even though I've mentioned the word neuroscience, some people might be thinking, Joy, could you just like, again, break that down for us? Another bit of gobbledygook, Joy, which you've kindly, because sometimes I skirt over things and I get told off. So there you
Uh,
go.
Neuroscience is really just the study of the brain, but it's a very vast field. So you have different neuroscientists who look at different aspects of the brain. So I do cognitive neuroscience. So I'm mostly looking at cognition. So that includes learning, memory, like all of these kind of things. And so trying to see how these cognitive skills are connected to what happens in the brain. You have behavioral neuroscience that's looking at how different behaviors are linked to what is going on in the brain. You have developmental neuroscience that's looking at your brain as you grow up from childhood to being an adult. And they look both at healthy people, and so just trying to understand how the brain develops, how those connections develops, etc., but also with people who have certain what we call developmental conditions. So that includes ADHD, developmental dyslexia, etc., and trying to understand when is the change happening that is causing these conditions, can we reverse them, and how do they develop in general. There are so many branches of neuroscience. I did write an article about it a couple of years ago, and I can't even remember, but it was dozens of them that I listed, just trying to map them. And what's quite interesting, I find, that I didn't know before starting my PhD, is that a lot of these neuroscientists, they don't really talk to each other. And so you will have a lot of neuroscientists looking at their very small area of the brain or the very specific phenomenon, and they have no idea that maybe there's a neuroscientist in a different branch of neuroscience that's looking at something that's actually linked to that phenomenon they're looking at, but from a completely different angle. And because they're using different frames for their research and different perspectives, they may never really find out about the work that the other lab is doing. So I think that something that's going to be really interesting in the next few years, where we have more and more tools to connect research together. There's a website I recommend for everyone to go play with, even if you're not in research or science, called connectedpapers.com. And you can just enter the name of a paper, and it shows you a map of all of the papers that are connected to it, and you can click on it, navigate it, and it's really fun. So we have more and more tools now that allow us to break those boundaries that are completely artificial between those different disciplines and neuroscience. And so I think a lot of people are going to start talking to each other, understand each other's work a lot more. And I think a lot of interesting research is going to come out of those kind of more like multidisciplinary collaborations.
Yes, I was going to say this whole thing about collaboration. I mean, when you're working with people, you're trying to find people to, affiliate with as well. It can be difficult to work out where people are. Obviously, we have, dare I mention it, Google as a search engine and other search engines, out there to find information from. And obviously, with the advent of AI, pulling together a lot of strands of information. But it's quite, when you say that I might be working on something scientific and you might be working on something scientific, they might be very similar, but we don't know each other. That sounds a bit like what happens in business anyway. And then there's going to be that whole area about secrecy. I don't want you to know, Anne-Laure, about my stuff, because I'm doing it a lot better than you are, and you might copy me. And there's all that stuff and secrecy that goes on around information, isn't there? So I hear about it would be nice if people do at least know what's being worked on, because then the collaboration can bring about something even better. So I hear exactly what you're saying there, but good stuff there. And is there anything that you've come across recently in this whole world of neuroscience that might be really useful for us to know, that might impact the way that it's just our productivity, our energy, our sleep patterns, the way in which we think? Because learning for me, Anne-Laure, and I was saying to you that going to school, being told to do exams and then remember things, I don't actually recall anyone teaching me how to remember things. They told me nothing about my memory, short-term memory, long-term memory. I knew nothing. So I don't know if there's something that you can share with everyone that's watching right now, just to look at how do we remember things? What's the whole mechanism that's going on in the brain?
Oh, well, that's
Put
like
you on the spot, sorry.
no, it's not that. It's more that it's like there are entire books written about to answer how does memory work. We currently don't know where memories are stored in any case, so I can't even answer that question. This is an area of research so we don't know. What we know is that synaptic connections between neurons become stronger when memories are formed, but the idea of locating memories in the brain is not something that we know some parts of the brain get more activated when we remember certain types of memories, etc. There are lots of advances, and we're figuring it out, but it's definitely not something I can answer in 1 second.
But
But
that's okay, Anne-Laure, because I was trying to look at it in terms of just memory, because I got a book actually looks at the way in which we learn. So long-term memory, short-term memory. These are concepts that I didn't even understand, long-term memory and short-term memory. So if you ask me to study, revise this, Joy, tonight and come back and talk about it tomorrow, I would stay up all night, read it a couple of times. I'd probably stop, have a break, and I'd probably read it again. I found a way of memorizing things, but no one taught me. And the brain does recall things and store things in certain ways, but there's no particular method that I was made aware of. So what I was kind of trying to say, Anne-Laure, was just on a simple level, even if you...
No, that's where I was getting at. I was going to say, instead of explaining how it works on a neurological level, one technique that has been shown to really help with long-term memory in particular is something called the generation effect. And that's the phenomenon where by creating your own version of something that you want to remember, you're going to both understand it better, but also have better recall. So I'm just going to give you different examples, but if you were a student in school, so that's something that could have, that you've been told to do, but I think it helps when you understand why it's important to do it, is that instead of just copying and pasting stuff or just writing whatever the teacher is saying in the words that they're using, writing it in your own words is helping a little bit. But even better, in order to remember things, we need to connect new information to existing memories that we have in our brain. So you need to form these connections. So if you want to make the most of the generation effect, you need to take that new information and create a new version of it that is connected with what you already know. So that's kind of what I did when I started writing about what I was studying in university. I would take that new information about neuroscience and I would connect it to information I already had in my mind about business. And I would create my own unique content that would connect those two types of information together. And now, of course, I remember every article that I've written because I created that connection myself. I really crafted it. It is my own memory that I'm creating for myself versus just trying to copy paste and download something that someone has given me and that I don't know how I'm going to apply it. And so in your daily life and work, if you want to apply this, it can be as simple. I've seen this done in certain companies and I love it, is having like a quick 30-minute stand up every week where everyone shares something that they learned that previous week. Guaranteed, if you're one of the people who, prepares for this and you give a 5-minute presentation about something you learned that week that could be useful for your colleagues, you're going to remember it for the rest of your life because you had to use the generation effect and create that own version, take the information and think about how can it be useful in the context of my work. I've also seen other people write a little monthly newsletter at work, internal newsletter, 5 things I learned this month. Again, you craft it yourself, you connect it to the needs of other people in your context. So just little things like these, generating your own version of the information and connecting it to your existing knowledge is going to do a lot more for your long-term memory than just trying to cram all of that information.
And yes, cramming, we all know about cramming information the night before. I had friends that were really good at passing exams, but they actually learned everything the night before. Really good short-term memory. Jealous. I was so jealous of them, but you forget everything, And I like the fact that, this thing about information, making it your own. And that means connecting it to different places within your own memory structure. And as you were talking, I could imagine a road journey, let's say because we're both in the UK, traveling from, let's say, London to Scotland. So you're in America from, I don't know, the East Coast to the West Coast. You're going to have that kind of map that you have to draw. You're connecting it to things that you already understand. So if I were talking about neuroscience and I was a very, very good gardener, which, I used to be, don't do it as much, I could connect the actual ideas around neuroscience to the similarities to gardening. And that would be the way I might decide to explain it to you. But through the explaining of that, my special way of talking about that, I'd be remembering it more. And I might also be giving you a different way to connect to the information. So is that have I got that right, Anne-Laure? I think as you were
Analogies
talking.
and metaphors are great. And actually, this is a form of generation effect, teaching something to someone else. And there's something called the Feynman technique after Feynman, the physicist. And I can't remember who named it that technique. Anyways, the idea is that you take something that you want to learn or study, and you pretend that you're teaching it to a 5-year-old child. If you can do that, it means that you've understood the topic because you can't hide behind any jargon or complicated terms or anything like this because you're talking to a 5-year-old kid. So it's kind of what you described here. You may have to use metaphors, analogies, etc. It can be a bit tricky sometimes because you can also hide the fact that you didn't understand anything by using a vague analogy. So, but the goal is for you to learn something. There's no reason trying to trick yourself, right? So yeah, trying to explain something to someone who has no knowledge of it using very simple terms can be a great way to use the generation effect as well.
I love that. And this whole thing about simplifying information, imagining you were sharing it with someone that was very young, because that forces you to talk in very simple language. And even when we're looking at generating content, whether it's on LinkedIn or YouTube, wherever it might be, yeah, this whole idea of cater to the level of I don't know, is it grade 5 in America? I think that might be a 10-year-old, possibly in the UK. But, just, I'm going to say the word, but it's not right. Dumb the language down. But okay, it's not dumbing the language down. Let's say simplifying the language so people can understand. And this area about visualization and metaphors, you've just taken me off into another world there, Anne-Laure, because and literally the phrase I've just said, you've taken me off into another world. It was like the power of storytelling. Why does storytelling make us drift like that? I'd love to. I mean, I'm almost like going into like a semi-sleep type place. But why does it's a very weird question, Anne-Laure, but
Oh,
why does
I'm
visualization and storytelling, why does very powerful, but why or how does it happen?
um, I'm trying to. I've read research around wandering and how it is connected to creativity. So I don't know if there's something there. Another thing that I know about, it's not really about mind wandering, but connecting with other people. So storytelling, there is some evolutionary psychology research showing that stories help us connect, transmit information in a way that is more practical and more memorable. And so somehow our brains have evolved to react pretty strongly to a story. When we know it's going to be a story, we pay attention because it could be useful information. It could help us survive better. It could help us, be safer, etc. Yeah, so those are the only things I can think about, but this is absolutely not my area of research. So
Yeah.
I actually don't know. I think it's a good question. Weird, but good.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look at the whole way in which stress is generated, and when we're in a stressful place, our mind doesn't think straight, because there's no access to the big smart bit at the front, that prefrontal cortex bit, and the emotional brain is just doing some really like clever things, like dominating everything, so you can't think straight. And I used to always wonder why, when I'm stressed or someone's like made me feel frightened, that I just can't, I'm just frozen, fight, flight, and freeze. I become a tree. And Laura, I'm like that, and I think my brain just doesn't work. And then it comes back on stream at some point, which is good news. But the shutting down of the brain, and stories like perhaps getting past that defense mechanism that we have, we're always like looking out for danger. It just bypasses it. And suddenly we're in a very safe space. I don't know how to describe the place, Laura, but it's a good place to be. And storytelling is a powerful thing. And I, deliberately use sometimes that whole phrase, once upon a time, people are in right away. You bypassed any like defenses that they've had, and they're just listening. And you said
Yeah,
sort of
I love
like
this.
getting their
And
attention.
you're probably onto something here because a lot of the automatic responses that we have nowadays are rooted in behaviors that were again good for our survival a long, long time ago. And hearing you talk about this, I imagine that when we were still living in caves and if we were around a fire listening to stories that people were sharing, it probably meant that we were safe. And so it was a time of the day where we could let all of those defense mechanisms go down, which makes sense to me, versus being out there in potential situations of danger where, as you say, you either need to run or freeze, not move, and make yourself as small as possible, etc. And where really you're in constant situation of danger. So I don't know enough about all of the evolutionary, like, research. I find it absolutely fascinating. I've read like more like pop science books, but I haven't read actual research on it. And it's super interesting to look at what are behaviors that are anchored in what that helped us survive up until now, and some of them are still good. I felt, like having this kind of relaxing feeling when you hear a story, for example. And some of them have become maladaptive, like the fact that every time we see something moving, we have to look at it. And so every time we see a notification, we have to look at it. So I find it absolutely fascinating. And it's something I don't know enough about, but that I think.
We can come back and talk about that, I'm sure. We've got like 5 minutes left here,
Mm.
Anne-Laure, and you just brought up something which has triggered me again, which is notifications and grabbing our attention and the neurochemical in our brain, dopamine. I don't know if we've got enough time, if you can just do a quick summary of why is it that notifications and any kind of things, like, why are they so powerful? I know that it's being used against us. People are using the brain to get us to buy our attention. But yeah, just have you looked at that, Anne-Laure? Have you? I don't
Yeah,
know.
you do need. I study, as part of my PhD research, I study ADHD, so I do look at attention quite a bit. And when it comes to notifications and the way a lot of apps are designed, the mechanism is very is very simple. Like, we actually, which is part of why we've been so successful as a species, but we crave learning. We want to know, because the more information that we have, historically speaking, the more likely we were to survive. Except that up until now, we've never lived in a society of virtually infinite, constant information. Our brains haven't adapted yet. And so we're still paying attention to everything, because before, any information that you missed could mean death. So you had to pay attention. You saw something moving, you had to look at it. You heard something, you had to know. Socially speaking as well, we're social creatures. So knowing what other people know, being in the know, means being part of the group, means also higher chances of survival. So yeah, our brain was just we're not designed to have access to that much information, and our brains are designed to paying attention to anything that's moving, different, or new, this novelty effect. And a lot of app designers are using this to keep us hooked
Yes.
to what they're building.
Taking advantage of the way in which the brain works. But of course, we know that, well, I'm of the mind that it's creating a lot of mental distress at the moment, perhaps because we haven't adapted to the fact the brain is flooded by so much information, which all feels to be of equal importance. But that's a whole new conversation around mental health. But the reason why I've sort of like transitioned from the world of like working for other people to working for yourself to creating Ness Labs, which I did ask you the question, what does the Ness stand for? And it was mindfulness or restfulness, that Ness bit at the end of every single word that is being used at the moment. But yeah, Ness, it's memorable. I told you it reminded me of the Loch Ness Monster, but that's because I live in the UK. But we've got 2 minutes left, Anne, and I don't know if you want to just remind people of where they can get hold of you. I have been putting up the links as we've gone along. Obviously, connect with Anne-Laure on LinkedIn, but also there's your website I've just put up and your handle for, I'm assuming, Twitter and other things. Is it Instagram as well? I don't know where you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, and I just created an Instagram account very, very recently. So come connect with me there. I'd love to. And if you have tips for Instagram, also let me know.
Sounds good. And obviously, you can connect with Anne-Laure on LinkedIn too. Just going to quickly check the comments because I've been very naughty and I've not been paying attention. Just making sure we got some good comments in there. Yeah, I can't see the most recent ones, but definitely, the stuff around the circadian rhythm, how we all have different, ways of working and times that suit us. Marilyn did mention earlier on, let's put her up here quickly, that, the bursts of energy that happen and having them at different times. She's quite pleased that I mentioned that because she knows that, different times suit different people. So thank you, Marilyn, for that. And any other questions that you guys have got, I'm going to go back and check what's there. But it's been such a great conversation, and I've learned some new things. Definitely that gentleman, Sahil Bloom, and this traffic light system around energy. Everyone should know about that. Energy, attention, very, very big things, because we go on about not having enough time. And I think I've just run out of time, literally 6 minutes past the hour. But so I'm going to bring things to an end. And is there anything you want to say to people just as a final passing, ending for us,
I
Anne-Laure?
just want to say thank you, everyone, for being here, to you for inviting me to my very first LinkedIn live as well. This was a lot of fun, so thank you.
My absolute pleasure. My absolute pleasure. So I'm just going to take down these details. There's so many moving parts here. Yeah, I feel like I ought to be an octopus, really, but there you go. So we'll take that off. But yes, everyone who's been listening in today, if you do have any questions, direct them at me. My name's Karen Joy Langley. I do say my full name sometimes, but Joy Langley is how most people understand me by. My profile name is probably Karen Joy Langley on LinkedIn, but you can find me. Find Anne-Laure as well, or come back and ask me questions. But great conversation about this whole thing about neuroscience, and understanding how your mind works is entirely, to me, you have to just know it, because everything in life is affected by it. We can't function, I don't think, properly without a really healthy brain and a healthy mind, especially if we're going into business. So many more moving parts to cope with. So Anne-Laure, thank you so much for coming on today. Been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And everyone watching, thank you so much for watching. Any questions, direct them at me, direct them at Anne-Laure. But yeah, I hope you've learned something. And yeah, if you want to learn more, let me know too. Would love to have a round 2, I'm sure, probably in the new year, and find out some more ways in which we can understand our minds and help it to build profitable businesses, also help our businesses to thrive. And if we are working for other people, just try and be in a state where we feel relaxed and comfortable, and we don't get ourselves into difficult situations emotionally or mentally or physically. So that's it for now, guys. Catch up with you all soon. And yeah, have a good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Okay, bye-bye.